U.S. Ambassador to Canada. Pete Hoekstra is disappointed. Not just disappointed, he's frustrated, confused, and apparently shocked that Canadians aren't exactly thrilled with America right now. Speaking at a Halifax Chamber of Commerce luncheon, Hoekstra delivered what can only be described as a masterclass in diplomatic tone deafness, complaining that he came to a Canada where it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a hockey stick. Let's rewind the clock and understand how we got here. This isn't just about hurt feelings or diplomatic miscommunication. This is about a systematic campaign of economic intimidation and outright threats that has fundamentally altered one of the world's most stable bilateral relationships. The story begins with Donald Trump's return to power and his immediate decision to weaponize trade policy against America's closest ally.
Well, the call is certainly very positive, right? You see the Chinese readout calling the call very practical, constructive, and positive. Well, that's a very high mark from Beijing's perspective. So I think what has led to this phone call is the deal that the two sides have negotiated over TikTok in Madrid over the weekend. So for the two leaders to have a phone call, we know that they have to have something to agree to or something to announce. I think TikTok paved the ground for that. And of course, everyone is thinking about the same question. A talk is a technicality, but people are focused on the prospect of a leadership summit somewhere in October, November. Now we know that they're going to meet on the sideline of APEC, which for the Chinese is not as good as a state visit to Beijing, which they originally hoped for. But now Trump make it clear that he is hoping to visit next year. I think we are counting on that the trade negotiation will run their positive result to pave the ground for that visit.
Tell me about the TikTok deal, because we've heard that it may end up being owned by Oracle in the U.S., and the Chinese may agree to that divestiture, currently owned by a Chinese company. Your thoughts on how this is going to play out? TikTok, hugely popular. The suspension of it has been delayed numerous times by President Trump. And of course, a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen with TikTok.
Well, it looks like if the deal is going to go through, and it looks like it will,
Recent diplomatic developments have shown just how dramatically the relationship has shifted. What started as negotiating tactics quickly escalated into something far more serious, a fundamental challenge to Canadian sovereignty that would reshape North American politics. From the moment Trump took office in January, he made it clear that Canada was in his crosshairs. The threat started almost immediately: massive tariffs on Canadian goods, claims that Canada was somehow responsible for America's fentanyl crisis, and most bizarrely, repeated suggestions that Canada should simply give up its sovereignty and become the 51st U.S. state. These weren't casual comments or negotiating tactics. They were sustained, deliberate attacks on Canadian independence that have continued for months. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on virtually all Canadian goods, affecting everything from lumber to automobiles to energy exports. He threatened even steeper tariffs, at one point suggesting 50% levies on steel and aluminum imports. But the economic warfare was just the beginning. Trump repeatedly referred to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Governor Trudeau, a deliberate insult designed to undermine Canada's status as a sovereign nation. He claimed the border between the two countries was just an artificial line drawn arbitrarily, as if centuries of distinct national development meant nothing. The annexation rhetoric wasn't a one-off comment or a negotiating position. It became a central theme of Trump's approach to Canada. "What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state," Trump declared in the Oval Office. He argued that Canadians would be better off without their independence, claiming they would pay much less tax and have perfect military protection under American rule. The condescension was breathtaking, but it was also strategic. Trump understood that nothing would unite Canadians faster than threats to their sovereignty, and that's exactly what happened. The Trump effect on Canadian politics has been nothing short of remarkable. When Justin Trudeau announced his resignation in January, his Liberal Party was trailing the Conservative Party by 25 points in the polls. The Conservatives, led by Pierre Poilievre, seemed destined for a massive electoral victory. But Trump's escalating attacks on Canada changed everything. As his threats intensified, Canadian voters began rallying around their flag. Enter Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor who won the Liberal Party leadership race in March.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
The two countries.
His approach to international relations reflected a new Canadian assertiveness born of necessity. The country had spent decades as America's reliable partner, but now faced an existential challenge that demanded a different response. Carney's response to Trump's threats was everything Hoekstra apparently didn't want to hear. Instead of capitulating to American demands, Carney adopted what his campaign called an elbows-up strategy, a hockey metaphor that means protecting yourself from aggressive opponents. "We didn't ask for this fight, but Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves," Carney declared. In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win. The elbows-up phrase that so offends Ambassador Hoekstra isn't anti-American, it's pro-Canadian. It's a perfectly reasonable response to what any objective observer would recognize as unprecedented aggression from a supposed ally. When Trump threatens your country's existence as an independent nation, when he imposes punitive tariffs on your economy, when he treats your prime minister like a subordinate provincial governor, elbows up is not just appropriate, it's necessary. But Hoekstra seems genuinely baffled by the Canadian response. You ran a campaign where it was anti-American. Elbows up. It was an anti-American campaign, he complained. The cognitive dissonance is stunning. He appears to expect Canadians to be grateful for Trump's threats, to welcome economic punishment, to celebrate attacks on their sovereignty. When they don't, he calls it disappointing. The ambassador also took issue with Canadian officials, describing the current situation as a trade war. He finds this language concerning and a dangerous place to go. But what else would you call it when one country imposes massive tariffs on another, threatens even steeper levies, and demands fundamental political submission? If it walks like a trade war and quacks like a trade war, calling it anything else is just diplomatic euphemism. The real-world impact of Trump's policies has been devastating for the U.S.-Canada relationship. Statistics Canada reported that Canadian exports to the U.S. dropped almost 16% after Trump's tariff announcements. But the damage goes far beyond trade statistics. Canadian tourism to the United States has plummeted, with airlines and state tourism boards reporting significant drops in cross-border travel. Many Canadians have begun boycotting American products entirely. The psychological impact has been even more profound. Polls show that 85% of Canadians oppose Trump's idea of making Canada the 51st state, with only 9% in favor. A Leader survey found that 63% of Canadians believe Trump should be taken seriously when he talks about annexation. These aren't the numbers of a population that's merely having a diplomatic disagreement. These are the numbers of a people who feel genuinely threatened by their neighbor. Canadian Cam Hayden, a frequent visitor to the United States who had traveled to 45 of 50 states, decided to boycott America entirely after Trump's annexation comments. "I said, forget it. I'm never going back until there's a change in the administration and a change in attitude," Hayden told reporters. His sentiment is shared by millions of Canadians who once considered the United States a friendly neighbor but now see it as an existential threat. The political transformation in Canada has been remarkable to witness. The Conservative Party's massive lead has evaporated, with recent polls showing the Liberals pulling even or ahead. This isn't because Canadians suddenly fell in love with Liberal policies. It's because Trump's attacks created a rally around the flag effect that transcended partisan politics. When your country's independence is under threat, party politics become secondary. Carney's rise to power is directly attributable to his strong response to Trump's threats. While Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre found himself in the difficult position of trying to balance his base's sympathy for Trump with the need to defend Canadian sovereignty, Carney had no such constraints. He could be unambiguously pro-Canadian, and voters responded enthusiastically. The irony of Hoekstra's complaints is that they reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of cause and effect. He seems to believe that Canadian anti-Americanism is the problem, rather than a response to American aggression. It's like punching someone in the face and then complaining when they don't smile at you. The ambassador wants Canadians to be passionate about the American-Canadian relationship, while his boss threatens to destroy that relationship entirely. Hoekstra's frustration with Canadian media and politicians using the term trade war is particularly telling. He prefers the euphemistic trade dispute, as if softer language could somehow disguise the reality of what's happening, but Canadians aren't buying it. When Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne said a lot of the costs in Canada's upcoming federal budget are directly related to the trade war that has been imposed on Canada, he was simply stating facts. The ambassador also complained that many provinces are still not selling American alcohol, and that Canadian politicians have been discouraging travel to the U.S. But these are entirely predictable responses to Trump's threats. When you attack a country's economy and sovereignty, don't be surprised when its citizens stop buying your products and visiting your tourist destinations. What makes Hoekstra's complaints even more absurd is the context in which they were delivered. He spoke in Halifax just days after Trump had doubled down on his annexation rhetoric, calling the U.S.-Canada border an artificial line and suggesting it should finally disappear. The timing couldn't have been worse or more revealing of the administration's complete disconnection from reality. The broader implications of this diplomatic disaster extend far beyond bilateral relations.
Tonight, flashpoint over free speech. The polarizing reaction after Jimmy Kimmel's show is pulled off the air.
You can't go around firing somebody because you're fearful or trying to suck up to an authoritarian criminal administration in the Oval Office.
He was fired for lack of talent.
And exploring what Canadians can say in their workplaces. Also, what the FBI director said about suspected terrorists entering the U.S. through Canada. What happened when we asked the agency to back up its claims? And a tiny town reels in a huge win. How a lucrative lottery changed the fortunes of a tight-knit Quebec fishing village.
Not in a million years did I ever even dream of coming here and doing this.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening. The man who vowed to bring back free speech to America at his inauguration this year is putting broadcasters on notice tonight. Donald Trump floating the idea of removing their licenses if what they air is critical of him. The U.S. president's comments coming a day after Disney indefinitely suspended Jimmy Kimmel's show for remarks he made in the wake of Charlie Kirk's killing. CTV's Heather Wright starts us off with the fallout.
Jimmy Kimmel stays, Trump must go.
Tonight, protests outside of ABC headquarters. The reaction to Jimmy Kimmel being pulled from American airwaves as polarized as the country's politics.
You can't go around firing somebody because you're fearful or trying to suck up to an authoritarian criminal administration in the Oval Office.
While Kimmel's comments have been slammed as unfunny and untrue.
There's a very concerted effort to try to lie to the American people.
The controversy all stems from what Kimmel said on his show Monday night.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Jimmy Kimmel went on to criticize Donald Trump's mourning of Kirk, pointing to the president's answer when asked how he was holding up.
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
In response to the comments, the chair of the Federal Communications Commission issued an unsubtle threat to ABC and its affiliates, implying broadcast licenses could be at risk if they did not take action against Kimmel. Nexstar, an owner of ABC affiliate stations that is trying to merge with another group and will need FCC approval, was the first to yank Kimmel. ABC followed suit shortly after, while another company, Sinclair, demanded an apology from Kimmel and a donation to Kirk's organization. Today, Donald Trump doubled down, saying broadcasters risk their licenses if hosts criticize him, but downplayed concerns about freedom of speech.
You can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack of talent.
ABC's decision to suspend Kimmel is not the first time a U.S. network has acquiesced to pressure from the White House. CBS settled a lawsuit over a 60 Minutes interview that coincided with a merger between its parent company Paramount and Skydance. CBS has also announced plans to cancel The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, a move the network says was a business decision. Today, former President Barack Obama slammed the decision, accusing the Trump White House of taking cancel culture to a new and dangerous level.
And while Jimmy Kimmel has not been officially fired from his show,
The impact on media freedom and democratic discourse has become increasingly apparent as tensions escalate between the two nations. Canada has been America's most reliable ally for decades, supporting U.S. military interventions, sharing intelligence, and maintaining integrated defense systems. The fact that Trump has managed to alienate this crucial partner demonstrates the self-destructive nature of his approach to international relations. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly put it bluntly, President Trump wants to put us into a state where we are much more weakened economically in order eventually to annex us. This isn't diplomatic hyperbole, it's a reasonable interpretation of Trump's stated goals and actions. When a leader repeatedly threatens your country's existence and backs those threats with economic warfare, taking him seriously is the only rational response. The economic consequences of this manufactured crisis are severe for both countries.
It's a chance for us to talk not just about the tariff dispute that's underway, but also what are we going to be able to do to deepen our bilateral relationships with each other. We've spent way too much time ignoring each other. Now it's time to do more.
President Sheinbaum said she wanted to strengthen maritime trade with Canada. Mexico is in the middle of a huge renewal of its infrastructure, including airports, seaports, and rail. But the Mexicans are concerned that Canada's ports aren't big enough to handle the volume of trade they'd like to see.
Canada's response has included strengthening ties with other trading partners, particularly Mexico, as both nations prepare for the upcoming review of continental trade agreements. Canada is America's largest trading partner, and the integrated nature of the North American economy means that tariffs hurt American consumers and businesses as much as Canadian ones. Trump's own Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has had to schedule meetings with Canadian officials to try to manage the fallout from the president's erratic policies. But Trump seems genuinely convinced that America doesn't need Canada. We don't need their cars, we don't need their energy, we don't need their lumber, we don't need anything that they give, he declared in the Oval Office. This is economic fantasy of the highest order. Canadian energy exports are crucial to American energy security. Canadian lumber is essential to American construction. The integrated automotive supply chain means that American car companies depend heavily on Canadian production. The really tragic aspect of this situation is how unnecessary it all is. The U.S.-Canada relationship has been a model of peaceful cooperation for generations. The world's longest undefended border has been a symbol of trust and friendship. Trump has managed to destroy decades of goodwill in a matter of months, all in service of what appears to be a personal obsession with dominating America's northern neighbor. Hoekstra's disappointment with Canadian attitudes reflects a broader failure to understand basic human psychology. If you threaten someone's home, family, and way of life, they're not going to thank you for it. If you attack their country's independence and economic well-being, they're not going to be passionate about maintaining friendly relations. The ambassador seems to expect Canadians to respond to aggression with gratitude, which reveals a stunning level of diplomatic incompetence. The elbows-up strategy that so bothers Hoekstra is actually quite restrained compared to what Canada could do. The country has significant economic leverage over the United States, particularly in energy exports. Ontario Premier Doug Ford briefly threatened to impose surcharges on electricity exports to neighboring U.S. states before backing down in favor of negotiations. But the threat demonstrated that Canada has options beyond simply accepting American demands. As this crisis continues to unfold, it's becoming clear that Trump has fundamentally misread the Canadian political landscape. His threats haven't weakened Canadian resolve, they've strengthened it. His attempts at economic intimidation haven't brought Canada to heel, they've united Canadians across party lines. His annexation rhetoric hasn't made Canadians question their independence, it's made them more determined to defend it. The transformation of Mark Carney from technocratic central banker to nationalist political leader is perhaps the most visible symbol of how Trump's policies have backfired. Carney's elbows-up approach resonates with Canadian voters precisely because it represents strength in the face of bullying. His promise that Canada will win in any trade conflict with the United States reflects a confidence born of necessity. When your country's survival is at stake, compromise becomes capitulation. Hoekstra's complaints about anti-American sentiment reveal the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Trump's approach. You cannot simultaneously threaten a country and expect its people to like you. You cannot attack their sovereignty and expect them to remain friendly. You cannot wage economic war and complain when they fight back. The ambassador's disappointment is the disappointment of a bully who expected his victim to thank him. The really remarkable thing about this entire crisis is how completely avoidable it was. The US-Canada relationship didn't need fixing. It was already one of the most successful bilateral partnerships in history. Trump created this crisis out of nothing, apparently driven by some combination of personal grievance, strategic miscalculation, and genuine delusions about American power. As Canadians head to the polls on April 28th, Trump's impact on their politics is undeniable. What was supposed to be a conservative landslide has turned into a competitive race, with Carney's Liberals benefiting from a surge of nationalist sentiment. The irony is perfect. Trump's attempts to weaken Canada politically have actually strengthened the party most likely to resist American pressure. The damage to US-Canada relations will likely outlast the Trump administration. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. The precedent of an American president threatening Canadian sovereignty will not be quickly forgotten. Even if future administrations adopt more reasonable policies, Canadians will remember how quickly their southern neighbor turned from friend to threat. Ambassador Hoekstra's disappointment with Canadian attitudes is really disappointment with the consequences of his boss's actions. If he wants Canadians to be more pro-American, perhaps he should ask Trump to stop threatening to annex their country. If he wants better bilateral relations, perhaps he should suggest ending the trade war. If he wants Canadians to lower their elbows, perhaps America should stop throwing punches. But that would require acknowledging that the current crisis is America's fault, and neither Trump nor his representatives seem capable of that level of self-reflection. Instead, they'll continue to blame Canadians for being insufficiently grateful for American aggression, insufficiently welcoming of American threats, insufficiently willing to sacrifice their independence for the privilege of avoiding tariffs. The elbows-up strategy isn't anti-American, it's pro-Canadian. And in the face of unprecedented American hostility, that's exactly what it needs to be. Ambassador Hoekstra's disappointment is noted, but Canadians have bigger things to worry about than hurt American feelings. They have a country to defend.